Good morning. It's always good to be with you.
Yeah, I have your tax principles in front of me, the tax plan that you've been working so hard on. I'm going to get to that in a moment. But what's your reaction to the president's bipartisan outreach? We know he had dinner again last night with Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer and came up with a new agreement.
Well, look, I think it's fine that he's talking to Democrats, that he's talking to whoever he wants. I talk to Democrats all the time. What matters is what comes out of it. We're hearing differing accounts from Schumer and Pelosi on the one hand and the president on the other. What I think people really care about is substance. And if we have Democrats who are willing to help us on tax reform, on regulatory reform, on economic growth and unleashing jobs, fantastic. That'd be a great outcome. I have to admit I'm a little skeptical. I'm working with these Senate Democrats every day. I have not seen much interest in jobs or economic growth or tax reform or regulatory reform. But there's no harm in asking, but I wouldn't hold your breath waiting for any real progress from the Senate Dems.
Well, this is why this is so important. I mean, does he not recognize that this is the same group that truly wants him impeached?
That's hard to dispute. I mean, listen, the Senate Democrats right now, they are captive of their far-left base. And their far-left base is filled with rage and fury. The lesson the Senate Democrats took from the 2016 election was that Hillary Clinton, in their view, was too moderate. And they need more Bernie Sanders, more Elizabeth Warren. That's today's Senate Democrats. And so it's hard to see a lot of common ground for the Bernie Sanderses and Elizabeth Warrens of the Senate to want to do anything on tax reform other than jack up taxes even more and kill even more jobs. That's obviously not, there's no middle ground there unless they make a fairly dramatic move.
Yeah, let me ask you about tax reform. You lay this out very clearly. You have three objectives for tax reform. That's growth, simplicity, and fairness. We're going to get into all of those. But I have to start with tax cuts across the board, which we have been hearing about, Senator, that the president wants to cut taxes on everyone. I'm looking at a report from the latest federal income tax data from the Tax Foundation, and it says that the top 1% paid a greater share of individual income taxes than the bottom 90% combined. In fact, the top earners pay more than 70% of all of the taxes. And yet, we're hearing from the Democrats, they don't want to cut taxes by a penny on the highest earners.
Yeah. Look, the Democrats are the tax and spend and borrow party. They support more taxes and then more taxes and then more taxes. Some of them long for the days of a 90% top marginal rate. My view is that jobs are number one. My top priority is jobs because that's the top priority of the Texans I represent. And the best lever for job growth, for more jobs and higher wages, is cutting taxes and simplifying taxes. I think every American, you ought to be able to fill out your taxes on a postcard. The 9 billion hours a year we spend in tax compliance, that's wasted. And let me make a very important point that I tried to make yesterday as well. It is important, I believe, that Congress pass a tax cut, not just tax reform. There are some congressional Republicans who want this to be what's called revenue neutral. Revenue neutral means if you cut taxes here, you jack them up over here so that the net is zero.
Right, which is why they initially wanted the border adjustment tax to get revenue.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I think that's a mistake. The case that I'm making to the president said yesterday he wanted a big, beautiful tax cut, the biggest tax cut ever. I think that's exactly right. We need to cut taxes on individuals, on families, on small businesses. That's how we're going to create jobs. And the only way to do that is to say this is not going to be revenue neutral. This is a tax cut because our priority is jobs.
And you say, scoring and looking over what this looks like of a 10-year period may not necessarily be appropriate, right? You say, why do we have to be married to not impacting the deficit over 10 years?
And the reason for this deals with really a procedural rule in the Senate. We're facing Democratic filibusters on just about everything. And so we're trying to figure out, all right, how do we accomplish our promises to the voters, even with the Democrats filibustering virtually every piece of legislation? The one exception to the filibuster is what's called budget reconciliation. And budget reconciliation is what we're using for tax reform. It says that it has to be budget neutral. It can't affect the deficit outside of the budget window. So you remember the Bush tax cuts that they expired in 10 years?
Right.
The reason for that is that Bush used budget reconciliation to pass them, so they had to expire the last year of the budget window. And so if it's budget neutral, the tax cuts can be permanent. If not, they have to expire at the end of the budget window. Well, what I'm arguing for is, okay, that's fine, but there's nothing in the Budget Act that says the budget window has to be 10 years.
Yeah.
That's not there. We should have a budget window of 20 years or 30 years. And if we have tax cuts that expire 30 years from now, that's close enough to permanent. We can just be honest. We're cutting taxes because we want jobs and economic growth, because that's the only way to pay down our debt, to get our economy turned around, to get people working, and have them expire 30 years from now, and a Congress 3 decades from now can deal with it at that point.
Well, you make a really good point, because if your priority is growth and jobs, economic growth and jobs, you don't want to be married to a 10-year deal. You need to make sure you're looking out longer term than that, so that business can actually say, okay, I'm going to make this investment plan, and I'm not going to worry about that. It's going to change in 10 years. You're calling for a single flat tax. I'm reading through your ideas here. I know you want to simplify in terms of 3 brackets versus 7, but you're talking about a single flat tax. What would that be?
Look, that would be my preference, is just a single flat tax that's fair and uniform for everyone. It's a big standard deduction, and then everyone pays the same simple rate, because I think there's power in bold simplicity. I think going to the postcard has power just because it's small. It means Congress can't go and stick a whole bunch of extra garbage on it. It means you have a lot more time in your life, a lot more money in your life to take care of your needs. And let me mention one of the most important ideas, Maria, that I talked about yesterday. Full expensing. When businesses invest in plant and equipment and new buildings, right now they depreciate those over a number of years. One of the most pro-growth tax reforms you can do is immediate expensing. What that means is that makes it much easier for a farmer to buy a tractor. If you're a steel worker, it makes it much easier for the company you work for to build a new steel factory. If you're a truck driver, it's much easier to buy a new truck, or a taxi or Uber driver, much easier to buy a new taxi or Uber. If you want jobs here at home, and not just jobs here at home, but manufacturing jobs, blue-collar jobs, the kind of jobs you got calluses on your hands, immediate expensing is powerful. Now, I will note in this debate in Washington, much of the debate is influenced by the financial services sector, and they're an important sector in our economy.
Sure.
Expensing is not that big a deal in financial services.
Certainly not for large companies, right? A smaller company is going to get impacted much more. We talked to Jack Brewer about this earlier, and he totally agrees with you. He basically said, if I could expense right up, money goes out the door, because I did all of these acquisitions of, trucks or whatever you just said as a farmer. If I expense this over several years and have depreciation, if I do expensing instead of that, that's going to allow me to hire more people and invest more. But, Senator, I want to know if you are actually on the same page with your colleagues, because there seems to be a White House plan. I mean, Kevin Brady, House Ways and Means chairman, said he's going to come out with his new principles on the week of the 25th. But the deduction is sort of cloudy. What deductions stay, what goes? And I was just talking with a Democratic congressman and a Republican congressman in the last hour. And it was incredible to me, Senator. The conversation illuminated why this is such an incredibly tough subject. Listen to this. Got to get your reaction.
I will not support an elimination of the state and local income tax deduction. We've got the highest local property taxes in America in New York State, and we cannot afford to get rid of that deduction. Right now, New York State's a huge donor to the federal government, and this is one of the few things that protects our people in New York State, is a state and local income tax deduction.
So there you go. I'm pushing them on. Would you agree to this? Would you agree to that? He would not agree to eliminating those deductions, and he would not agree to a 15% corporate tax rate. So where are we on this then, Senator?
Listen, there's a lot of disagreement right now. There's not consensus within the House. There's not consensus within the Senate, and the administration has yet a third view. We're going to have to sit down and come together. That's what it's going to take in the Senate. We got to get to 50 votes. We have 52 Republicans. We need to find a plan that can bring together 50. That's going to take discussions. That's going to take some give and take. And the only way to do it is to have the players all sitting at the table, to have conservatives, to have moderates, leadership, the administration, and say, all right, what's the heart of what you want? Let me give you one more example that I think will help bring people to consensus. We ought to repeal Dodd-Frank as part of tax reform. Would have a big impact on the economy.
Well, it's your party, though. I mean, some of these guys that you work with, I don't think they want the president to succeed, or they don't care if he succeeds or not.
Well, we've got to deliver on our promises. That's what I'm working night and day on.
Ted Cruz, thank you. We'll be right back.
Thank you.